Hello everyone, my name is Paul Third, and this week I finally want to wrap up my Dolby Atmos series because my Dolby Atmos 7.1.4 setup for mixing is now complete. I'm pointing there because it's there, it's next door. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, I have been making a series over the past year. I've discussed budget speakers for Dolby Atmos. I've also discussed building a Dolby Atmos room and went through all the trials and tribulations of that shit show next door. And I've also talked about audio interfaces and why the Audient Audio is basically the best buy for, an interface for Dolby Atmos. And with all that wrapped up, obviously you've got to talk about the calibration side of it. Now, before we start, just a quick disclaimer, right? I am not coming at this as a specialist. I'm not a Dolby Atmos specialist. I'm just an audio geek. I'm just an audio engineer that's built a Dolby Atmos room. I have tried to stick as close to the circular ITU spec using the Dolby Atmos Dart spreadsheet. I am using Sonarworks for the calibration because it meets the minimum requirements of Dolby Atmos. And as I mentioned earlier, I am using the Audient Audio as it's a Dolby certified interface. And just watch that video. I'll leave a link up here and down below so you understand. So to be clear, I am not a Dolby Atmos specialist, but hopefully, coming from a place of experience, building that room and playing about with all the calibrations and taking so long to get it right, hopefully, the experience of me building this room is hopefully going to give you some good information for when you finally get to the final stages of calibrations. It's a nightmare. But however, let's get to the don'ts of calibrating a Dolby Atmos room. Number 1, don't acoustically treat your room like you're mixing in stereo. Now, I know it sounds obvious, but the only reason I'm telling you this is because many people are used to treating rooms with the notion of they're just worrying about, the two speakers in front of them. All I've got to tell you is that in a Dolby Atmos setup, the main aim is to have all your speakers as flat as possible and they all work in that space. You don't want to have your front 3 speakers measuring great, but your sides have big massive nulls and notches and peaks in them. Because at the end of the day, the more processing that the calibration software has to do, the more unnatural everything is going to sound. Now obviously, there's no such thing as a perfect room, but there are things that you could do obviously to get a better response. Have a play about with, where your desk is positioned, how far the speakers are away from the wall, even the speaker, how far the speakers are apart, and there's many things that you can do. But in a Dolby Atmos room, where essentially, especially in my room, the speakers are taking up the whole fucking room, every part of that room has to be treated. And that's why in my room, if I show you the measurements of my room in Sonarworks, as you can see, every single speaker, the floor speakers, right, so the front 3s, the sides and the rears, they are all genuinely quite consistent. Obviously, they're not all the same. It's impossible. You're never going to get all of them to measure completely flat. But you can see that there's a consistency, and Sonarworks isn't having to do really any more than 4 or 5 dB at the most in most of them. And that's the consistency that I was looking for when I started thinking about treating this room. Now, as you'll see, I have went OTT in my room. I've got DIY custom panels, but I'm trying to think on top of my head. So I've got 2 2x1 panels on the left, 2 2x1s on the right. I've got a 2x1 at the back above the door. I had glass panels in there, which I boarded up and put thick acoustic foam. I made 2 bass traps, 3.5 meters high because my fucking ceilings are that high. I covered the window, 2x1 window, completely in rock wool. And I've got it covered by a piece of fabric. I've got 2 Thomann acoustic panels either side of the left and rights. I've got an acoustic ceiling panel from Thomann as well. And we're not done there. I've also got 2 entire rolls of rock wool, unopened. I've got one really, not tall, but really thick one in the right hand corner underneath the shelf where the projector is. And on the back left wall, I've got an entire roll of rock wool, and I just completely covered it in fabric and shoved it right at the back. Now, many people may see it as OTT. I get that. But at the end of the day, when I was speaking to people from GIK and other, I spoke to an acoustician, their advice to me was, Paul, get the reflections out of the room. I was like, really? I thought it was meant to be immersive. He's like, yeah, but you're using directional speakers. And if you were using up-firing speakers and stuff like that, yeah, you need the reflections. But in a setup where all of your speakers are directional, you're wanting the least reflections as possible. And that's what I did. You can go in that room, there's no point in the clap test, you'll get nothing back from the clap test. And you can, like, honestly, I could belt my voice at high, like, SPLs, dB SPLs, and you get nothing back. There is just nothing in that room. Like, what you give it, it just sucks it all in. And in my opinion anyway, it's made for a much better sound. In my opinion. It's my opinion, take it with a pinch of salt, but as you can see from the measurements, pretty decent. Right, okay, number 2. Don't leave it up to the software to fix distance issues. This is something that, I was told by, a few different people that, yeah, don't worry too much about the distances and stuff like that. The calibration will sort that all out for you. This is difficult to talk about because there's kind of varying advice. Now, the most common, thing that I've seen when it comes to the calibration side of it is that the calibration will kind of sort, distance kind of irregularities of about, 15 to 20 centimeters. But again, there's no science to me that proves that I've been able to find. But most people, and I've read online and other places, that, in terms of the calibration, about 15 to 20 centimeters is kind of how much the calibration is going to be able to sort out distance irregularities with just making stuff louder or quieter. My advice is to not leave anything up to the software. Get your tape measure out and just follow the DART guidelines. As I said earlier, your main aim is to get the software to do as least as possible. These are things that, like, it shouldn't be, adjusting for. If you've got your spreadsheet, if you know exactly where things should be placed, place it where it should be. I made the mistake of trying to create a bigger circular ITU so I could fit more to the average Dolby spec. And, the issue in my room is that when you've got the acoustic treatment in and then you put the speakers in, because obviously your distances are tweeter to tweeter, it kind of shortened the room. So the width of it was compromised. And I was like, oh, it's fine. I'll just let, like, Sonarworks, like, calibrate that out. But I was talking at least maybe 50, 60 centimeters of a variance. And I could hear it, when I did the early, calibrations, I could hear it. And I was like, the sides aren't right. And sometimes it'd be too loud, sometimes it'd be too quiet, and everything just wasn't sounding cohesive. And the best results that I got was when I just looked at the room and I accepted what the room was, and I, adapted the ITU layout exactly to what the room is. So the dimensions are the dimensions, and I worked with the dimensions, and I managed to make it work. Like, I'm talking like I managed to make it work so close that when my door opens, like the rear right speaker is like that from the door, but I was able to make it work. And this goes for the level differences as well. Like in Sonarworks, what it does is it does like a full sweep and it plays pink noise, and then it measures the speakers and it'll tell you if the speakers are out. Now, in Sonarworks, it'll tell you can leave it, to the end of the process, and it'll kind of adjust the outputs and stuff like that. But I don't advise that, and neither do Sonarworks. The reason that I don't advise that is because if things are too quiet, or especially if they're too loud, they're going to be interacting with the room differently. So your calibration is going to be skewed. And at the end of the day, your main aim with your Dolby Atmos calibration is to ensure that your calibration is correct to the level that the speakers will be playing out in the room. Now in Sonarworks it tells you, so I was just generally going to the back of each speaker, even getting a ladder and going up to the heights and tweaking the back and then just doing the test until it gave me the thumbs up. If you don't have Sonarworks, a way you can do this is to use basically the same test that Sonarworks do, but it's a bit more manual. I think I read that if you play minus 20 dB full scale pink noise out of your DAW and you set your output so that they are all outputting 85 dB SPL, that's kind of a foolproof way of making sure that they're all at the right level. You can use something like Room EQ Wizard for that. I've seen people do it, or you could do it with if you've got like an SPL meter. I think if you've not got Sonarworks, getting Room EQ Wizard is probably the best way of doing it because you've got a measurement mic. If you don't have a measurement mic, then again you can use an SPL meter. But either way, right, long-winded, just make sure that anything that you could do yourself manually is done prior to the calibration. And the same goes for number 3, which is don't half-arse your time alignment. Time alignment is very, very, very important because obviously in a 7.1.4 setup, you've got 12 speakers. And if they are not aligned, then just think about it from a phase point of view. And just think about it from when you're placing things in like an object in an immersive space. And essentially it could be in between like 2 different speakers. And you imagine when you're sweeping things about or you're trying to place certain things, if all the speakers aren't time aligned, that is going to affect the solidity of the image. Think about drums, right? Obviously when you've got drums and you've got all these drums on the kit, what's the first thing that we do? We make sure that all the drums are time aligned. And you've got to do the same with your speakers. Now, I'm not going to lie, manually, I imagine it's an absolute pain in the arse. Like, thankfully with Sonarworks, it just does it for you. It does it within the measurement and it does it within like, sub-millisecond, precision. They use phase response measurements in order to get everything like bang on. I've heard manual ways of doing it. I think people have talked about playing an impulse or maybe playing clicks or whatever. And I don't know if you record certain, I don't know, right? Just go online. There's manual ways of doing it. And sticking with the theme of alignment, it brings me on to number 5. Don't put your sub where Dolby recommend, right? Don't just trust where the Dolby spreadsheet tells you to put it. Because what you've got to remember about a sub is that a sub is essentially omni, right? It's omnidirectional up to a certain frequency. I don't know the exact science, but I think that's, if my research is right, that's why most crossovers are 80 Hz, because normally when you start to get above 80 Hz, the sound starts to become more directional. I think below 80 Hz, most of the sound is omnidirectional. Now, with it being omnidirectional and you're dealing with standing waves and low frequencies, the sub needs to be wherever that it needs to be in the room where it interacts best with the room. Now, in my room, if I put it where Dolby recommend, I was getting like a big massive like 9 to 12 dB notch around like 80 Hz. And I was finding that no matter where I moved it forward and back and like a little bit left and a little bit right, it was still like 8-9 dB and it was a big massive notch. Thankfully, in my room, I managed to find a spot, as you can see, that basically means that I only need to have like 3 dB of correction, which is fucking phenomenal. And that position is right in the corner of my room. I've got the Cali WS 6.2 right in the corner, in the left-hand side corner. And for whatever reason, it just interacts with the room in the best way. And what that means is that I have a consistent bass response all the way throughout my speakers because I'm utilising the bass management in Audio and Audio. And trust me, I know it's frustrating. You'll be pulling your hair out. But you really, really do have to find that one place in your room where you can manage that low end. My good friend Ed Thorne, that I do the Working Audio Tools podcast with, he genuinely believes that I've completely lucked out. Because he's like, Paul, how did you manage to get it that fucking flat? It's like, Paul, I've been in so many rooms, I've seen the measurements, and that's hard to get. You're a lucky bastard. But at the end of the day, as lucky as you could say I am for having that one good position in the room, if I would have stuck with the Dolby recommendations, I would have been an absolute mess. And Sonarworks would have been having to do so much. And trust me, right, when Sonarworks has to do as much as like 9-12 dB of correction, it's never going to sound right. It's never going to sound natural. But thankfully, I was able to take the time and I was able to find a place for the sub that just works in the room. So yeah, take your time and get your sub positioning right before you even think about doing a full 7.1.4 calibration. And talking of subs, that must bring me to number 6. Don't, and this is subjective, right? But this worked for me, right? So because it worked for me, this is the reason why I'm saying it's a don't. Don't calibrate your system with the bass management off if you plan on using bass management at the end. Now, the reason that I say this is because I tried it without the bass management because somebody advised me to do that. And what I can tell you is that when you calibrate without bass management on and then add bass management later, the low end level just wasn't right. And I was getting to the point where I was playing about with the frequency crossover. I was like, so let's change it from 80 hertz to 100 hertz. And I was just like going back and forth, and I was switching bass management off on certain speakers, and I was just trying to get the low end right. And it just was never right. I just could not get it. But when I did the calibration with the bass management at 80 hertz on all of the speakers, all the sub information that's going from the speakers to the WS6.2V, the bass management, is just right. Now, just because it didn't work for me using that method doesn't mean it won't work for you. And again, it depends on your system. Like if you've got, say, Trinov, then I know that Trinov, Ed was telling me that it's got a way where it measures it anyway. Like it measures everything separately, and like even if you put bass management after, it recalculates and stuff, whatever. But obviously Sonarworks doesn't work like that. So my advice, especially if you're using Sonarworks, is definitely to calibrate with the bass management on if you plan on using bass management. And what you'll find is that your bass is at the right level, all the speakers are at the right level, because Sonarworks, or whatever measurement thing you're using, is getting that sub in the room. So essentially each speaker is seen as properly full range. So in terms of the level balance of each speaker and the time alignment and whatever it's doing, I'm just telling you, it works. And as soon as I done that, I was like, mwah, chef kiss, that's this finished. I can just walk away from this room and enjoy listening to Dolby Atmos. And I've got one more for you. Now this is just because I find it funny that I made this mistake. It wasn't funny for me at the time because the Sonarworks measurements take about 45 to 50 minutes at a time. We're talking 36 measurements over 12 speakers. Trust me. Vroom, vroom, vroom. I don't even think. I'm getting PSD. I'm getting PTSD just thinking about it. But I made a big mistake, and some of you might make it, but I thought I'll put it in. I find it funny, but some people might make this mistake if they're not paying attention. Now, when you're doing a stereo calibration with Sonarworks, right? Normally what you'll find is that if it's stereo, even though the mic is omni, you're normally still pointing the mic, in the middle of the two speakers, but it's still, the omni mic is still pointed at the two speakers. Now, because I was calibrating stereo speakers in the control room, I just had the mic the way I normally used to do it, and I quickly brought the mic in, and I done an entire multi-channel calibration when Sonarworks had finally fixed all the bugs and got it working properly with Audio. And I did the whole measurement, sat back, and I was like, this doesn't sound right. I was like, this just, something's off. And I went home and I was thinking, oh no, what have I done? Why is it not doing it right? This isn't sounding the way I know it should sound. And then it just came to me. I don't know why, I must have visualized the measurement process, and I went step by step in my autistic brain. The mic was pointed at the left and right when the mic has to be pointed up. Because obviously when you think about it, right, when you've got your Sonarworks mic, when it's pointed up, it's going to equally pick up all the speakers around it. And as soon as I did that, I did the measurement, I was like, yes, finally. Thank the Lord, thank Jeebus, thank whoever is up there. Thank you, the audio gods. Thank you. It was just perfect and exactly the way that it should be. So please don't make that mistake, because you're going to waste your time and you're not going to get realistic representations. Because obviously what you've got to think about, right? I know it's omni, right? But if the mic's pointed, right, still directed at the left and right, think about when it's trying to pick up stuff from behind it. It's not equally picking up everything, right? It's pretty simple, but I just thought I'd put that in because, I was pretty annoyed when I'd done that. And hopefully at the end of all that, if you follow that or don't follow certain things, then hopefully you'll be in a fully calibrated system where the software isn't doing as much, as it could be doing. And you just get to sit back and enjoy Dolby Atmos and just enjoy the sound, feeling that it's not coming out of the speakers. That's what I feel when I'm in that room now. I just sit there and, I don't really hear the speakers. When some of the fucking calibrations that I did when I was trying to do manual EQ moves and stuff, they just didn't sound right. Because before Sonarworks was fully integrated and it was able to directly transfer it on to Audio. So on Audio, you could directly transfer the full correction, the delays, fucking the gains, everything onto the device, and it genuinely just sits on the DSP of the unit. Before we were able to get that integration, I was having to do like 10-band EQs. There's a way of doing it where if you select a DADMan, you could export a DADMan preset, which will give you like a 10-band or 15-band EQ. Aurea has like manual EQ bands, so I did it all manual, and they didn't sound right. They just didn't sound right. Like, as soon as I did Sonarworks, and I let Sonarworks do all the calibration, everything just sounded the way it was meant to be. And, in reality, you can do it all manually. You don't need to pay like the £500 or whatever to get Sonarworks. But, if you're somebody like me that can't sleep at night over these things, then I genuinely would advise getting something like Sonarworks that's going to do all of the tiny, tiny little nitty-gritty things for you. The level, the time alignment, the correction. It's going to do everything for you in one piece. And see, when it's done right, you can just sit back and just like not worry. If I would have done all that manually, I would have been second guessing myself constantly that I'd made a mistake. And, that's just, it's not worth the mental torture for me. So my advice would be, get Sonarworks if you're going to get into it. If you want to go even further down the rabbit hole and you have the money, get Trinov. I think it's like fucking 10, 12 grand. You know me, I'm not paying 10, 12 grand for that. Didn't even pay for Sonarworks. Thank you, Audient. My good friends at Audient helped me out there. But yeah, there you have it, right? It's done now. I can now learn how to mix properly in Dolby Atmos. The series is done. And yes, hopefully if you watched all of that, you've got yourself a nice little cheap setup that's under 7 grand. I think the whole thing costs, including all the calibration, if you got my setup, would be about just under 7 grand. So it is possible to do it on a budget. I do think it's the future. I cannot emphasize how amazing well done Atmos mixes sound. You can't go back to stereo after you listen to amazing Atmos mixes. I've had people cry in that room, for God's sake. I've had like 50, 60-year-old like proper musos, vinyl guys come in and be like, I've never been this excited about music in like fucking 40 years, Paul. This is unbelievable. I'm now starting to get projects purely by getting people in that room. So it's working out for me. It might not work out for you. And there you have it. Remember, I'm not an expert, right? Just remember, I'm just giving you my advice based on my experience. Hopefully it helps. If it does help, consider, dropping a super thanks. Or again, there's a fucking buy me a coffee thing link. I don't know. Just fucking, if you find it useful, just help us out, right? Spent a lot of money on this fucking studio. Right, okay, I'm waffling, right? However, there you have it, right? We're done now. I know you hate Dolby Atmos, but get it up, yes, right? Whatever. My name's Paul Third, and I'll see you later.